Where am I going next? Yes, we're talking about the head of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA. Clifford Getete is leading the discussions among hundreds of delegates of top government officials and others at the 2026 edition of the Africa Business Forum. Now, that two-day annual forum, which opened today in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital, was focused on financing Africa's job and innovation for a sustainable transformation. The yearly conference brings together key institutions, officials who speak to the drive by UNECA to increase investments and partnership that are expected to benefit the African continent. And here are excerpts from the opening formalities.
Financing the future of Africa is really asking a sharper question on the Africa we are intentionally building. Let's consider framing the opportunity from our mineral endowment. So, research indicates that we have over $29.5 trillion in minerals under the ground. Now, if we can transform those to industrial output on the ground, that will be the price. When we can convert our minerals into steel, aluminium, fertilizers, batteries, and inputs that drive our industrialization, urbanization, connectivity, energy, and food security opportunities. Sustainable transformation at scale is what creates jobs and drives innovation. Jobs are the outcomes of transformation. Transformation that is a departure from our current dysfunctional extraction systems. I'd like us to focus on outcomes. Let's build on what we are going to deliver and how we deliver. So, my question to everybody here is, I was here last year, we had conversations, I'm here this year, hopefully we'll be here next year. So the question was asked, is what will change in 1 year? What are the policy decisions that will be taken? What are the projects that will be financed? And how many jobs are we going to create together? Not announcements, not promises, finance projects linked to jobs that we can measure. Value proposition. Our most urgent priority today must be how we define Africa's value proposition to the world, from a supplier of raw materials to a talented workforce diversifying globally competitive supply chains. Africa's greatest asset is not only what is under the soil, it is who is above it. Our people, our youth, the talent we build. To anchor our discussions on solutions, we must question certain assumptions and norms that exist today. We must ask ourselves powerful questions that will lead to change and the outcomes that we seek. So, for example, why we have accepted dysfunctional extraction models that exploit our resources and jobs we can create by their transformation here in Africa to import inflation. Especially when these models compel us to pay for the logistic costs of other economies. For instance, we export iron ore free on board, absorbing all the internal costs of our ports, transport, rail, financing, and we import steel, cost, insurance, and freight. So we pay for the steel products at the factory gate, and we deliver the raw materials to them at the factory gate. Why do we accept a model like this? Now, this is not something that changes by begging and by lobbying. No, that's not how it changes. It changes when we say, okay, if we need 1 billion tons of steel, we will produce at least 300 million. And then we will go on that journey to ensure that over time we can cover the gap of what we need. That is how we change it. It's not by making speeches. It's not by begging, it's not by lobbying. No, that's not what we do. We change it by the actions that we take. This isn't only a trade imbalance, it's a jobs imbalance. It ties our economies to volatile commodity cycles and starves our industrial base for stable demand. And the same is true for energy, power especially. You don't build viable utilities on lightning alone. Industrial demand is what sustains electricity markets. People always ask, so if energy is such an essential resource and that's required for development, how come African utilities are not viable? They are not viable because there's no industrial use. That's why they're not viable. And they will not be viable if we're exporting raw materials. We have to change that.
Under the theme, Financing the Future of Africa, Jobs and Innovations for Sustainable Transformation, I wish to express my sincere appreciation to His Excellency Taye Serasi, President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, and the government and people of Ethiopia for their gracious support and continued commitment to continued cooperation. I particularly want to thank the President because he has officiated almost every high-level event that we organize here at the United Nations Economic Commission. We thank you very much, Your Excellency. I also thank all our institutional partners for their continued commitment to Africa's economic transformation. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we meet at a moment of profound global uncertainty. As we convene today, growth is slowing in many regions. Debt vulnerabilities are rising and supply chains are being reorganized along geopolitical lines. Climate shocks are disrupting production systems, while technological change is reshaping labor markets faster than policy responses can keep pace. And yet, global capital has not disappeared. It has simply become more selective. Investment now follows scale, security, and future markets. So the question is not whether capital exists. The real question is, where will the next engines of global growth emerge? To answer that question, we must look not at today's GDP size, but at tomorrow's demand, workforce dynamics, and market expansion. Growth will emerge where the world's youngest workforce lives, where urbanization is accelerating, where digital adoption is expanding, and where new consumer markets are forming. That place is in Africa. Africa is no longer a continent waiting for transformation. Transformation is already underway. Through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we are creating a single market of over 1.5 billion people. Digital platforms are expanding and startup ecosystems are scaling. This transformation is already visible in multiple sectors across the continent. For example, in Côte d'Ivoire, a youth-led cocoa processing enterprise now processes 36,000 tons of cocoa annually and has created about 1,000 jobs. In Morocco, an integrated automotive value chain created over 220,000 jobs. And Ethiopia's digital payments ecosystem engaged hundreds of thousands of agents and merchants. The narrative is therefore changing. Africa is not only exporting commodities, but beginning to export value as well. However, despite these successes, the pace of transformation remains below potential. Africa faces a huge infrastructure financing gap and further loses billions annually to illicit financial flows. Even so, the continent holds over $1.1 trillion domestic institutional capital in pension funds, insurance pools, and sovereign assets. The paradox, therefore, is not a lack of capital, but the lack of mechanisms that connect capital to bankable projects. The central question before this forum is, how do we convert African opportunity into investable projects at scale and at speed?